Hello and welcome to Today You Learned. So, the thing I want to talk to you about today is actually this one. So, open source intelligence or hacking Office 365, or in other words, Azure AD. Right, so the idea behind this presentation, this demonstration mostly, is actually, well, we assume that this is already a little bit known, so we will start by knowing how Active Directory works. So I will not spend any time on this. So it's a centralized management. How does a hacker use Active Directory to its benefit as soon as he has any credentials of Active Directory? That's a bit of the focus right here. As soon as he has any credentials, he can actually just install some default Windows tools, get access to the Active Directory by running these things, by using the credentials that he harvested. Any Active Directory credential will work for this. As soon as they are installed, he can run this and use that to get a list of every single user of Active Directory and then move on from that. So what happens here is called authenticated enumeration, finding information about something, in this case by having some form of authentication. So the idea for this for Active Directory is actually what I want to show you and demonstrate to you and abuse for Azure AD. So Azure AD is actually the same concept, right? You have users, groups, central management, although that central management is now partially online or maybe even fully online. So it can be run standalone, not important. But the important part here is that the concept is the same. As soon as you have any credential from Azure AD, no matter what kind of user it is, how limited he is, in 99% of the cases, I have never seen it otherwise, you can have full access or full enumeration of that Azure AD, meaning all the objects can be seen, all the details of those objects can be seen, the computers that are part of Azure AD, the devices, the applications, the users, and so on and so on. So you can use a graphical interface for that. So this is something that is extremely interesting if you currently already use Azure AD. Any user can try to visit this URL, which I will do during the demo, and have some nice information, even if this is limited, even if it is blocked, because that GUI can be blocked. However, just like with normal AD Active Directory, you can also manage and enumerate Azure AD via the command line interface, which is usually PowerShell. So it looks like this. We're almost through the slides, right? So very interesting, and this is something that I love to prepare beforehand, of course, is to install these modules. And these more or less do the same as the Active Directory remote server administration tools. But then for Azure AD, they allow you to interact and enumerate those systems. They are built into Windows, as most hacking tools actually are. So we can install them, and once we have done that, we can actually log on to Azure AD. But again, just like with normal Active Directory, it assumes some credential, right? So okay, how do we start? So we start from zero. We have no prior knowledge, or not a lot of prior knowledge, of the Azure AD that we want to investigate or hack. So this is actually the last slide. So hacking Office 365 Azure AD. So this is our, he wants us to pen test his company, right? So this is the company, iccc.be. This is the guy, Chris Yellow. And why do I show this slide, and why do I show any slides? Well, in this case, it's very important to actually use whatever little knowledge you have to your advantage. In this case, we know that this guy is called Chris Yellow, and this is how his email address is noted. C Yellow, so first name, first letter of the first name, and then yellow at, and then iccc.be. So these are the 5 steps that I will walk through. I could explain it in detail in slides, but that's of course no fun at all. So let's dive right into the demonstration itself, right? So I will actually use a machine that has been prepared a little bit for this, right? So I have a tool right here. So our assignment is for this user, right? So the first thing we might want to do is this company actually using Microsoft Online or Azure AD or not? Well, there's actually an easy way to verify that. We can open a browser, and then this URL is actually quite interesting right here. So this URL, we can fill in any username you want. Can be a random one, but this will actually show us if that company is being managed by Azure AD by single sign-on, or not. If it's not managed, if it is unknown, for example, facebook.com, if it is unknown, then of course this company is not using AzureAD or Office 365 and we are done. If it is something else, for example, this one is managed, means that it is using AzureAD, and I believe example.com even has something else. Federated means it uses Active Directory federated services. That's also cloud, but not Microsoft Cloud per se. That's something different, so this is also not what we want to see. But most modern companies will look like this. So for the demonstration, we are looking at this company, iccc.be, and this would be the full registered name of that company online, right? So we have now verified, very important of course, that this is actually a company that uses Office 365. Next up, the next step actually is to find possible users that work for that company, right? So there's a nice tool for that. It's called the Harvester, right? So let me show you how that works. .py. It actually allows you to specify a domain. So the only thing you can specify is a domain, and then it will find from various sources like LinkedIn and Google and Trello and so on for users that are linked to that domain. So someone is putting on his LinkedIn account, for example, that he works for iccc.be, or his email address is whatever at icc.be, and so on. This tool, and a lot of other tools, by the way, will actually demonstrate this tool for us. So this is how it could work for iccc.be. This is just open source intelligence, which means this is actually legal. So far, everything I'm doing is actually very legal, even without the pen testing agreement, because I will just go to websites like Google and APIs for Bing and Binary Edge and DNS dumpster, stuff like that. So if I press enter, because it will take a couple of minutes, so it will now actually try to scan for this domain and then store all the results in this txt file. Should actually, oh, I know what the problem is here, of course. I need to specify the file name like this. If I'm not wrong, should be this. Right, okay. Always something wrong. .py. Okay. Just type it then. And then the sources will be all. I want them all. And then I will put the results somewhere. And normally you should be seeing it. So as I said, it might take a couple of minutes before this happens. So I actually already prepared a result for this. So let me show you the results, or how it looks like. So in the Harvester, I actually have the done version of this for the Harvester, and it looks like this, right? So this is what we get for this target. And if I move down a little bit, we can see that you have some results right here. Okay, interesting. And then here he has found no less than 203 users that he assumes that are linked to iccc.be, since that is the domain that we specified right here. So these are a lot of users like C. De Winter and Foster and Tuvui and so on and so on. So what the next step is to actually filter out all the users right here and turn that into a possible user list, right? Because we now have a lot of headers and other stuff that is of course not part of our investigation. We can use grep and Excel, for example, and whatever you want. A nice one that I have made looks like this, right? So I grep on that minus sign, because that's where the users are located inside a txt file, and then I only take the first field. So this means that if I run it like this, run a user list, then something is wrong, of course, because that would be not the ID. Of course, it's in DOM, right? Okay, so let me just copy the DOM one right here, so I can actually run my script like it should. And now we should have our user list. So right now we have user list that is more or less okay to proceed because it's not ready to filter out the working email addresses or not. So now I have my my users right here. There are quite a lot, like 203 of that. So let's turn that one into possible email addresses. And this is important. I don't know. Well, in the meantime, this one has actually worked, right? So maybe it even looks like we have more LinkedIn accounts and other stuff. So I could even use this one as well, but like 179. Okay, not bad. 197. So, but let's proceed with this one. Why not? So this is a list of our users. So as we saw before from our assignment, right? We have Chris Yellow, but he has the email address cyellow@iccc.be, right? Okay, so let's turn this user list that we have right here into that format. Again, let's use some Linux magic for that. It's a little bit more complicated this time. So it will actually read from that user list. It will add iccc.be to the end. It will take the very first character and then it cuts on the space. So is this good? Well, it's not perfect, right? Because if you can see it like this, it only takes the second word of every line. So after the space. So if any names are made in 3 different words or there are multiple spaces, then this is actually not taking them correctly, right? It puts them into a lower case because the emails are generally lowercase, and then puts that into an email list, right? So it looks like this. So for most of them, this looks plausible, right? So we have like R. Steven, but this seems to be something bad. So this might be Robin the whatever or R. End. So these are probably not gonna work, but doesn't matter. Let's try them out anyway. So some of these will be okay and others are not that great. You can filter them out manually, use Excel, use whatever language or tool you want, of course. So the next phase, the next step is, so how many do we have right here now? We have an email list, so let's email list, do a word count, and we have 152 possible email addresses. This is the amount of characters, but so this is the amount of lines. We have 152 email addresses. So let's find out which of those email addresses are actually being used by the company iccc.be. To verify that, we actually have several options, but a nice one is something called, let's copy paste that to be sure that I don't make any typos. Office 365 Creeper, which you can see right here. So let me maybe put it at the top a little bit like this. So Office 365 Creeper, you can find it as a gist on my GitHub. The only difference with the one that you can find on Google is this one is actually written in Python 3 or converted to Python 3, right? So if I take a look at the code behind it, it's actually created by this guy. All kudos to this guy, but then I converted it to Python 3, so you can just use that one if you want. So Office 365 Creeper, which has a help functionality like this, it expects us to give it a list of email addresses to validate one per line, and then let's write that to an output. So the next portion of our investigation would be this. Why does again, not okay, this is okay. Why does this work, or will this work? Well, it uses the endpoints of Office 365. Again, we are using the cloud. We are just using normal functionality of the cloud the way it is intended to be used. We are not connecting to any company for real. We're just connecting to microsoftonline.com and office.com and so on. And now he is actually going through each of the how many were there? 152, I believe, possible email addresses that there are, and checking if they are invalid or valid. And as you can see, most of them are invalid, but several are valid. So we will now end up with a limited list of accounts, but for who we are 100% sure, or more or less 100% sure, that they are valid for this domain on Office 365 or AzureAD, which is more or less the same. There are differences, but never mind. Again, this takes quite some time, so I actually prepared this as well. So if I go to the prepared one, valid accounts, and then instead of this, I will do something like this. So these these are all the accounts that are valid by using this tool, the tool that we just saw right here. So these are valid accounts. So we're moving forward. We already have made a list of all the possible users, and then these are the ones that are for sure active on that domain and on Office 365. The next part we will do is we make assumptions. We assume that that company, that all the people working at that company might not share the same idea about security, right? And more specifically, passwords. So if any of these users, these verified users, actually have a bad passwords, then we might be able to try out and find that insecure password, right? So the idea here is actually very simple. We will just try out 1 or 2 or 3 passwords, not many, just one maybe to start, and then try that out one time on each of these accounts. In the meantime, this one is done. Let's take a look. Valid accounts like this, more or less the same, right? So let's work on this one. Why not? So we want to know which accounts are valid, and instead of doing a password brute force or dictionary attack or something like that, there's actually a term for this. It's called a password spraying attack. So we will run 1 or 2 passwords on each of these accounts, which will not trigger any issues on Microsoft Online and so on. So one tool that we can actually run for that or use for that. There are some Python tools, but let's maybe try now to move into PowerShell, because we will actually end in PowerShell as well. So let's open up PowerShell, the fun of Windows, right? So this, let me maybe go to my desktop first, make sure it's a little bit cleaner. So this tool, that is available online for free. This will actually perform our Microsoft Online spraying attack, right? So let's take a look how that looks like. Module, this works like by importing a module like this, and then invoke MSOL spray like this, and of course we need to specify which users. Now I pressed Control Space, and this will actually show us in the newer versions of PowerShell what options there are for that specific function. So we can specify an out file, a user list, and a password. And that's actually the only things that we need. Even the out file is not required. So the next thing I want to do is take my valid accounts and put them on my desktop. So valid accounts, put them on my desktop like this. So now we have our user list, valid accounts, like this. Password that we want to specify. So now we come to the awkward part or the difficult part. What could be a very good password for this company to use? Well, from our first account right here, we can actually, for our first test, right here, we can see that the company is called icc.be, and the full name is Insecure Cybercrime Corporation. What would be the chance that someone has used this password insecure 2022? For example, there are a lot of examples that you can imagine, but having the year in it could be very interesting. You might maybe even try to find out the password policy. The more you know about the company, the more you can guess on what kind of passwords could be very interesting to verify. So in this case, insecure 2022. Why not? Let's run it. Let's see if something happens, right? So he is now, for each of those 26 valid accounts, trying out that single password and using one, and we already have a success. So that's already fine. So now we already have a combination that is working for a specific user with a password that we already guessed. You can even take it a little bit further. You can, why not, try the second time, but actually we already have enough to go on. This is not required, but let's try out with this one. Why is this an interesting one? Well, you often have people who are changing their password every 3 months, so together with the seasons, and then you might have something like winter 2022. Or other things like name of the company, but in different versions like this one. And then if you're lucky, you might get some results on that as well, for example, in this case. And so on. So there's actually a pretty limited list of passwords that you are, of course, depending on the size of the company, where it's located, the kind of company, the amount of accounts that you can find. This will probably not be so successful for very small companies. But the consequences can be large, right? So, for example, like I showed you in the slides at the beginning, we're actually almost done. So let's log into this company, aad.portal.azure.com. Very interesting one. And of course, it helps if you don't make any mistakes in typing it in. AAD, let me maybe zoom in a little bit. So AAD portal azure.com, like this, right? So it asks me to log in. Let's pick a username, right? Maybe the first one, why not? Does it matter? This is a company that I have created myself, right? So I have full permission from myself to hack this company. It's kind of important, maybe as a base for this demonstration. So I am logging into that. Yes, they signed in. This is already also not so good, of course. It didn't ask me to confirm via SMS or two-factor authentication. If that were the case, then the demonstration would be done right now, unless any of the others don't have multi-factor authentication. But as we can see, we have now full access to the dashboard. We can actually click on users. By the way, A. Winkle, the user we used right here, is a very limited, normal domain user, not a domain admin, not an enterprise admin. What I am showing here is default behavior of AzureAD, right? Same with Active Directory local, right? So we have, instead of having 26 valid accounts that we have before, we currently have 114 users that are in this list, where we can filter, download, do whatever we want, do not whatever we want, because I'm a limited user. I will not be able to change a password on any of these users, or let me try it out, right? I don't have the privileges for that, but we can have a look, right? So in certain companies, this is actually filtered out. We are not able to see the users via the website. But then the next one, the maybe one of the last ones I wanted to show you, will not be limited. This, I have never seen a company that was able to block what I will do right now. I have actually installed a module. Let me show you which module I'm talking about, the Microsoft Online one. It's already installed, but this would be the command that you run as administrator to install that. And as soon as you have installed that, you can actually connect to that MSOL service like this. It will have a pop-up right here where we can log in with a Winkle, right? Let's maybe to be sure, just copy paste this one like so. Let's log in. If we don't see anything, then it means we are now logged in. So now we can actually run commands like this, get MSOL user, and it will actually give us back all the users. You can block the website, the web interface, but this I have never seen so far where you can block this thing. So for example, if you want to have more information on a specific user, you can actually copy paste that user, take your command back, and then there's a valid, you can press dash or control space to have a list. So we can actually specify a user principal name like this, and then I believe we can actually have more information if I ask for all the properties, all the objects, which would be something like this. And now we have full information that is available for this user, and this would work for any of the other users, right? So maybe to finish off, to do some automated reconnaissance, very interesting as well. There's actually one tool I wanted to show you before I end this portion of the video, because there's a second video where I will actually move on to inside the company. And it is like this one. So this is a very interesting one if you're enumerating. This is actually, now we are enumerating because we have user accounts and passwords. So now I am downloading this PowerShell file. This is a PowerShell file that you don't have to import. It doesn't have any functions, just some parameters. So I can run it like this. It also asks me to log in. So let's do that. Let's try to type it. Like this, okay, and now we can enter project name. Is it typing? No. First project, right? For today you learned, and now he is actually enumerating very interesting information for that company that could be useful for later on, or to move on to getting not only the users, right? The users, detailed information about the users, which of them are administrator, in which group they are part, what's the domain information, company information. You actually saw some interesting company information right here. So we have our technical contact, we have an address, we have the tenant ID, which could be very useful later on, and so on and so on. So this is a very interesting program to actually get more information on that. Maybe one last word, and this will be the end before, well, maybe the next video will explain more on that. Well, not maybe, it surely will. And this is this very special account that we see right here. If you want to know what this is for and how this can help you to actually get local domain admin on a system, then stay tuned for the next video, I would say. Thank you, and as always, keep learning.